Good afternoon and welcome to the CIBSE West Midlands Region's CPD webinar on Building Regulations Approved Document O, Overheating. My name is Josh Brownlee and I'm the Chair for the CIBSE West Midlands Region Committee, and it's great to have you with us today and thank you for joining us. Just a few housekeeping elements to start with, if I may. Please could you turn off and keep off your cameras and mics for the time being. We're not aware of any fire system testing, so if you do hear an alarm or announcement, please action it accordingly. This seminar is being recorded for visuals and audio and will be made available publicly shortly afterwards. CPD certificates will be sent via email afterwards. Please get in touch if you don't receive it automatically. Please use the chat function to ask any questions and I'll relay them on to the panel. If you could indicate who the questions aim towards or whether it just in general to the whole panel, I'd appreciate it, and it will hopefully get your query answered more accurately. We'll try to save some time towards the end of the hour for open forum questions. Approved Document O, Overheating, came into force on the 15th of June 2022. It applies to all new build residential development, care homes and student accommodation. The regulation requires the development of overheating strategies, demanding input from specialists. It will change the way we design our dwellings. This roundtable panel discussion comprises a series of reflective sessions, bringing together experts in the assessment of overheating, in addition to perspectives from ventilation and cooling suppliers and lead designers for property developers. This is the first session and it's intended to provide an overview of the regulations and what those on the panel view as critical points that need to be considered. Further sessions are currently scheduled for December and June next year. Providing expert opinion on the assessment of overheating, we have Susie Diamond and James Healey. Susie co-founded Inkling, a building physics consultancy, in 2011. Her core skills are in using dynamic thermal simulation tools to predict the operational energy and thermal performance of buildings. She uses these skills creatively and intelligently to enable more informed design discussions and better buildings. Susie has become an expert in the field of predicting overheating in homes. She was the lead author in CIBSE's TM59 design methodology for the assessment of overheating risk in homes, which is now referenced in Approved Document O. TM59 being the one-page design stage tool published in 2019 and supported more recent retrofit version. She is a lead author on the imminent Future Homes Hub Compliance Guide for Approved Document O and is working with authors on proposals for an updated TM59, for which research is currently being undertaken by Loughborough University. She regularly speaks and writes blogs and articles on the topic of assessing and mitigating overheating risk. Welcome, Susie. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
James Healey is the Acoustics Director at AESG and is an industry specialist in acoustics, ventilation and overheating. James is the principal author of Acoustics, Ventilation and Overheating Guide, which is now referenced in Approved Document O. James is also part of the same group of principal authors who have this week published guidance on how to produce assessments which are compliant with the regulation and has contributed to the previously mentioned Future Homes Hub Compliance Guide for Approved Document O. Hi James, it's good to have you with us today.
Hi all, thank you.
Providing the perspective of a ventilation and cooling supplier, we have Richard Payne. Richard has been working in sales and marketing roles within the construction industry for the last 19 years, which has given him a comprehensive knowledge and understanding of the supply chain and its intricacies. He has been involved directly in marketing, product management, sales and product development of commercial and industrial fire safety systems and HVAC products, including heat pumps, heat recovery units, electric heating, underfloor heating, and window vents across the European market. Having gained some valuable skills and experience during his time at Honeywell and Dakin, he has now returned to the HVAC market to leverage his knowledge and experience across the whole Volution ventilation brands. Hello, Richard. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And providing the perspective of a developer, We have Sam Potter. Sam is the Design Director at Reef Group and Architecture Director at Urban R, Reef's in-house design studio. He has led the design of some of Reef's most prestigious schemes, including Cavendish Square in London. He oversees the design and management of a broad spectrum of complex mixed-use projects that deliver transformational impact in a number of UK cities within the healthcare, hospitality, workplace, retail and placemaking sectors. Sam is an architect with a passion for environmental performance and the creation of innovative public spaces. Welcome, Sam. It's good to have you today.
Hi, thank you.
Excellent. So, Susie, please could you set out the key points of relevance in relation to this regulation from your perspective?
Well, it's quite a big question. I don't know if you want me to cover all of the content of part A. That usually takes me an hour, but the key things probably to mention are that this is essentially a good idea. I think overheating in homes has been an issue for a while, and TM59 and other methodologies have existed for a while to help us with that, but nothing's been mandatory outside of schemes referred to the GLA or to other planning requirements essentially, but it's not been widespread or consistent that anything's been that all homes have been assessed. So I think essentially it's a good idea and falls in line with some of the Climate Change Committee recommendations that came out a while ago now. So it's good that something's been implemented, and we're talking about the approved document O that applies across England, and there are slight variances in what's been brought in Wales and Scotland, so that's worth bearing in mind. But I think we're just going to reserve ourselves to the English regs at the moment. We have seen, I mean, we've just come off the back of a fairly nasty heat wave, so I think most of us are conscious of how our homes perform in hot weather, probably more pertinently now than we've been for a while. And I think we've all probably suffered regardless of how well our homes do, unless we've got air conditioning built in, because 40-degree heat is impossible to entirely mitigate. But some homes obviously perform much better than others. And some homes perform so badly that even in quite modest temperatures, without it being a national heat wave, can still see quite uncomfortable internal conditions. So I think the key thing is to make sure that all homes are built fit for purpose and that aren't going to chronically overheat and can passively deal with the weather that's coming our way.
And James, sorry,
yeah,
Susie, keep going.
Well, those are the main things. I mean, I think we'll get on to the issues of, I mean, there's a complicated bit of compliance. So it's not as well worded as it might be. So it's actually quite fiddly to apply in practice. And we can get on to some of the nitty gritty of how that works and some of the additional requirements around security and noise in particular, I'm sure we'll cover. So yeah, I'll let other people have a go.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that, Susie. And James, from your point of view, key points of relevance?
Well, pretty much everything Susie said, they're very relevant, and we've all experienced high temperatures this week. But I guess the key point that few points that I'd like to make really around the environmental conditions, because any mitigation strategy. So it's one thing we need to design our dwellings better so that the heat gains are reduced, but at the same time, when we're removing the heat that will occur, it needs to be done in a way that it means that you can still use the property, and that's the key factor, is that there's no point designing places for people that mean that they can do one thing but they can't do another, and so you end up with this an uncomfortable situation anyway. So bearing in mind that we have to think about the comfort of the people that we're designing these places for, it's entirely necessary that any strategy that's developed needs to be usable, and that extends to noise and air quality. So we can't very much expose people to poor levels of air quality at risk of their health, but to deal with overheating. And as Susie said, these things occur more often, and it's not uncommon for a normal summer for people to suffer throughout the summer in some situations. So the design needs to account for that occurrence regularly in some or many situations. So exposure to air quality is a health risk unless it's thought about, and the same applies to noise really. And the regulation covers noise at night. So perhaps the biggest health risk for people across the Europe really is sleep disturbance, and that the knock-on effects from sleep disturbance cause serious health effects, and that's why noise is an intrinsic factor in any overheating strategy, to make sure that we're not inadvertently placing people into situations where the knock-on effect of anything is causing other problems, basically.
Yeah, that element of comfort is quite a subjective one, and one person's comfort is not necessarily somebody else's. But Richard, what about you? Key points in relation to the regulation from your perspective?
Yeah, I think this is one regulation that we interface with, Part F and Part L for energy, and Part O for overheating. So it's a welcome addition to the suite of regulations that we have to comply with. I think the important parts here is it's always an interaction between all of the standards that we have to meet. They're all here for health. We're passionate in our organisation around noise and providing adequate ventilation for healthier homes and environments. And I think that for a long time, the regulations have subordinated ventilation to energy efficiency, which has led us to have a more of an overheating problem in the properties that have been built. So it's really good from my perspective that mechanical ventilation is being flagged in Part O as one of the potential solutions to the problem, and that it's got a higher weighting now in the rest of the regulations, so that we're going to take it seriously. But I do think that one of the most important takeaways that I've learned from my time in the industry and what we talk to our customers about is there is no one solution here. It will very much depend on the type of property that you have, the location of it, security issues, as James has mentioned, noise issues overnight as well. So there's a number of factors that need to be considered when putting a solution in, and a lot of those factors are geographic in nature as well. So it gets complicated. I think we've got the products that can help. But I think the important thing is it's here and it's being recognised, and that mechanical ventilation has been put as part of the solution, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, good. And Sam, from a developer's perspective, what about yourself? Key points of relevance?
I think the key thing is it's welcome, not by all of the development industry, certainly. But I think it's similar to the other guys. It's a case of how it interrelates with the other compliance requirements and what pressure that puts. But I think the really interesting thing we're seeing, and we're in a slightly privileged position of doing some fairly large projects which have involved streetscapes, urban parks, etc., is it puts pressure on to actually change the external environment where you can. So balancing some of the things James was touching on, let's change the external acoustic environment, let's improve the air quality so that we can actually have naturally ventilated responses to this improvement. And before we had that, we had very limited capability of imposing that on, say, local authorities or other private landowners. And actually the squeeze, as I often call it, with the confluence of regulation that particularly this year and obviously with the climate emergency is driving, is actually forcing what we need, which is better in external environments in cities and not just accepting what's there. And the more and more of us are now capable of influencing that. So I think it's good. It's another stick to get us to where we must get to very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. James, how have you approached working to the regulation?
Yeah, see, yeah, it's very interesting. So a lot of people are thinking about this. You know, we've got a building. Okay, we need to think about overheating. How do we solve it? Well, actually, the thread of thought needs to be very at the first stage of thinking about a site is actually how noisy is my site, and is it exposed to poor air quality, because everything after that leads you down a different route. So if noise isn't an issue and if air quality isn't an issue, then you've got great freedoms to look at the natural solutions and opening windows and everything, and the strategy can be developed with fewer constraints. But because we need to have that strategy usable, the first question needs to be, is the site in a noisy or poor air quality area? And then everything after that follows. So if it is in a noisy area, then you have to think about a solution that doesn't involve opening windows. You know, a cohesive, well thought out strategy that actually makes the internal environment acceptable for people. But that first question is it in a noisy or poor air quality area, basically, and that's really how I have been approaching it and communicating to people across the industry, really, that they can write at the beginning of the process.
And Richard, what about from a manufacturer supplier's perspective? How have you approached working to the regulation?
I think it really depends on the project. What we do have is a suite of different products that we can offer to our customers. We recently, you know, I'm talking within the last 2 or 3 years now, launched acoustic purge ventilators. We mainly because of increased ventilation rates that are required to either meet the ADF purge requirements without openable windows, or to deal with overheating issues in the summer as well. So it's all about moving more airflow through the properties, and because of that, what we're seeing is we're seeing larger units that are being specified over and above what the requirements would need in ADF, so that actually moving more air gives you a better ability for nighttime cooling, better ability to remove the pollutants and the excess heat. But with that comes bigger products, it comes bigger ducts, it comes with acoustic attenuation, acoustic linings that go around the products, mainly because when you move more airflow and the fans are running at a higher speed, you get more noise. And that's what I was saying earlier on about managing the different requirements within the regulations, is that we've got solutions and products for people to apply to their projects. And it's about making sure that we meet and provide all of the relevant guidance to deliver against those regulations. So for me, it's larger units, larger ducting to keep the velocity down, it's acoustic jackets to keep the noise in the system, it's attenuation to stop the noise coming through the ducting, and really making people aware of the impact that can have. So it's much better to run a larger unit at a lower flow rate than it is to run a smaller unit at a higher flow rate, because it becomes much noisier. So it's a balancing act. And the other thing that we have to that we're talking about is, you know, ventilation to deal with overheating can be 10 times the ventilation rate of the property, where purge ventilation in Part F is 4 times the normal flow rates. So actually, we have to do other things, and we can't do it on our own. In terms of a ventilation solution, we have to be part of a system and the package of measures that are applied to the property in order to deliver the required outcome for that property, and that comes in solar shading, other keeping the sun out, keeping the light and the heat out to start with, and then getting rid of the heat once it's in there is where we can really come into effect.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dilemma whether you, as you say, run the fan at the selected flow rate and add an attenuator to the thing, or whether you run it at a slightly slower speed for a bigger unit and negate the need for the attenuators. And of course, the eternal difficulty of ceiling void space and access and maintenance space as well. Sam, anything from your perspective? How have you approached the regulation?
We've approached the regulation in the same way we've always been designing for overheating for decades. In truth, we just haven't been forced to be compliant, and it is changing the way we're designing and delivering the buildings. Not just that, but overlaying it with Part L obviously really pushes us. So the big change that I think we're seeing in-house is we're designing much more from the inside out. And we've always designed passively. We've always started with orientation. We've always considered aperture, sizing, variation around the buildings. But now with the issues surrounding super insulation, air tightness, we're having to work even harder. So we start to look at individual rooms from a point of view of how small can we make the window to still achieve the daylight, the view, the comfort, the human aspects, and look very hard at whether we can then balance that with opening windows. And Richard won't like this, but we just desperately try to get rid of anything mechanical if we can, and that's obviously comfort, behavioural, but also cost driven. And that's how we go. But we're finding at the moment we are just getting snookered, even with fantastic orientation, because we're having to make super insulated homes, strong air tightness, and we're working in cities where the environment sadly has only been going one way. So how have we approached it? Well, coming back to the way I talked about the first one, is we do all of that, and then we look to get rid of traffic, and we look to introduce trees. And we've got a project at the moment where we've used this regulatory environment to close a road which had 4 bus stops on it outside a residential area, which has mechanical cooling, and we've designed the whole system to be stripped from the building because we think we're 3 years away from moving all the buses somewhere where there aren't receptors, and we'll have a pedestrianised street outside. So it's driving placemaking. So we're trying to use the regulatory environment as a force for good, and it gets complex, but and developers have an obligation to do that, whereas many don't have that approach because they simply can't make that influence. So again, it's a good thing, but it's snookering the ability to actually meet all the answers and forcing us to change cities externally.
By orientation, I'm guessing that's a pure north-facing, north-south orientation of a building for all of the units, I guess.
It not necessarily. It's taking it's first off trying to look what the site will allow you to do, and obviously balancing all the receptors and all the elements that are creating the nuisance. And then it's facade by facade, aperture size, use, changing the uses around within the residential property to gain the greatest benefit. And that is all the good passive stuff that everyone's been doing for decades. But even when we get it almost perfect, it still can't work because of the compliance issues, and that's simply to do with the external environment, which leaves us only one option, which is change. And I fully embrace that, and we have to adapt.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Susie, how have you approached it?
That's really interesting what you say, Sam, about changing the external environment, because that's not usually an option I suggest to clients, but I'm going to start because noise is such a big one, and we tend to just respond as if it's a given rather than push back on whether it can be removed. I think it's quite early days in terms of response. It's, the regulations only really just come into force, and we're still getting our heads around it. I've obviously done a few projects and I've done quite a lot of research into it, but in terms of what the solutions are and what we'll see, I mean, I know you've planned a couple more of these events going forward, so as we reconvene in the future, it'll be really interesting to compare notes on what the practice is like of applying this regulation. I think it's going to change a few things, and I think it's going to make single aspect flats a lot harder to build, for one. I think and I think it's going to drive looking at overheating much earlier in the appointment. So I think we're going to see, just because if it turns out that there's an issue and that you're non-compliant, to find that after planning is a massive headache. So what's difficult is it's quite a detailed, involved calculation to do, and it's quite hard to do that at an early design stage, but I think we're going to have to learn to be more adept at looking at sort of broad brush early doors, making educated assumptions where the design isn't fleshed out yet, and making conservative assumptions that gives the design a bit of wiggle room, so that we can ensure that designs are on track early enough that we can be confident going to planning. So I think that's one of the big things we'll see.
Some fairly fundamental changes, I guess, to our approach as an industry to the issue. Richard, have you foresee any changes as a result of the regulation?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to just come back, if I could, just to Sam's point about removing mechanical systems and removing where you can, because absolutely it's the right thing to do if you can. And I think the thing I'd just touch on there is an interaction between all the regulations, as I've said previously, and Part L is driving down the or driving up the air tightness, whichever way you look at it. And when you get to very, very airtight buildings to look after the precious energy that we put inside of it, it's actually forcing us to use continuous mechanical ventilation in all of our properties. So, you know, the point I'd really make is the regulations are pushing us in one direction, and actually it kind of pushes us in a less desirable way for other regulations like Part O. So actually, it's a balanced approach to delivering a good indoor environment for health. And you know, if we do it right, then hopefully we can reduce the amount of mechanical ventilation and mechanical systems that we can put into the absolute minimum that we need, and still have good functioning, performing properties that people can live and enjoy in the conditions that we're going to be facing into the future. So sorry, I just thought I'd come back to that point. So I thought it was valuable to add, but I'm with you, Sam. I'm with you. We don't want you putting anything in that's not required. That's absolutely for sure.
Yeah, verging on passive house, I guess.
Yeah, passive house is a great example of a building methodology that absolutely mandates mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. You know, the thermal mass insulation and the products keep you cool in the summer, and they keep you warm in the winter. So, and there's a number of other things that you can do in that standard as well. So, you know, I think if all of these things are applied in the right way, then they're actually beneficial. But if everything comes together and they're applied in an incorrect fashion, then I think that's where some of the problems come together. So, you know, like you said, Sam, you're balancing small windows with the human factor of everybody wanting to have an amazing vista for wherever their flat or apartment is. It may be in central London, and actually things are fighting against one another. So, you know, you don't. Big glazing is a problem for Part O, but it's good for people's well-being, I guess.
Yeah, there's a fascinating piece on circadian rhythm and the body's reaction to daylight, and I guess reducing the apertures, as you say, Sam, will have quite a big impact on that. But other than reducing glazing and apertures, do you foresee any other changes, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, we're working with James a little bit on something which is long-term view, and it kind of comes back to hope of changing the external environment. And what's really good in a way is we work with a lot of big funds, and we're educating them on what they need to do with buildings. Their view is they're entirely focused. The money is entirely focused on low energy, net zero carbon, low, you know, embodied carbon driven out, zero running, no offsetting. Those are the things they want to be able to say to their shareholders. We say to them, we can't say any of that right now, because we work in environments in city centres, certainly, where living is challenging to achieve that. So what we're saying to them is take a long-term view. Put buildings together that comply now, where you've got smoggy, noisy environments, where you struggle to achieve certain orientations because of limitations of sites, but design them so that the buildings can organically be adapted over time. and design the buildings for 150, 200 years and work on the basis that we all work together to make an environment where you can open the windows because the noise is acceptable because vehicles have either disappeared or are limited to those which require for the function of the city, and the air is absolutely breathable. But design your systems, low carbon mechanical systems that can be removed from the building without much disruption at a point 20, 30 years, whenever it is in future, where we can all live the utopian dream. So it is actually changing the way we design, and it is forcing funds to take a much longer view on their assets, which is only a good thing because it then helps the embodied carbon point of view that those buildings will last a lot longer than everything we've been ripping down that's only 20, 30 years old. So wholesale change, it's driving. It's a very exciting time to be in the building industry is the simple truth. And fortunately, funds and the money that really gets behind these things is hungry to learn and understand so they can compete. Yeah. Sorry, a little bit too blue sky, but gives you an idea of where we're at.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Thank you very much for that, James. What about you? Any foreseeable changes?
Yeah, well, as Sam said, we're working together on something, and that's a brilliant example where it's forward thinking and it's thinking about things in a bigger picture. And what really is changing, and Sam and Susie have said this, the perspectives are changing in that we do have to think about these things very early on and understand them, because they are sculpting, so particularly noise and air quality, for example, for this regulation, but just the environment and where we're building and where we're living is sculpting how we the design of the buildings that we live in. So and that to me makes sense, but it's changing the perspective of people because they're thinking about these things a lot earlier on, and that is the thing that I see as the change, because very often in the past we've in our industry we've tended to be an afterthought. Okay, we've got this building, we want to put it, we're going to put it here, it's going to look like this, and it's going to, it'll have this layout. Oh, and we have to deal with these things, and it's an afterthought really to think about the kind of things like noise and air quality, and actually it should be the other way around, because it's actually going to drive more efficient, more usable and nicer spaces for everyone. So yeah, that's what I see as the change as a result of these kind of regulations. Yeah,
good, excellent. If anybody does have any questions, if they want to pose them in the chat, then I'll ask them on your behalf during this part of the presentation and the seminar. We have had a question in, Sam, I guess this one's for you. Rather leading and maybe a little bit thought-provoking, but are developers ready for the change?
Some. Very few in simple terms, but the real answer to that question is the quality of the people they collaborate with. That's how ready they are. If you're a sophisticated operation and you know your sectors, particularly resi, student health, etc., you will surround yourself with the appropriate professionals. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I had more than a low-level grasp of the full regulatory environment, which is why I work with people like James, because we need to understand everything in that, but equally in the manufacturing environment. I mean, it's true. The only way we work is learn together. Many developers work in a silo. They think they know best. They think their last property really succeeded, but they don't bother and go and look at the post-occupancy results, and they're wrong. And therefore, they don't bother employing the best people. They don't bother actually moving on from people who aren't very good and working with others. So it's really the developers who are ready are those who are prepared to collaborate, who are agile and are prepared to say when they've got it wrong last time. I often say to some of our competitors, how many nights did you sleep in the last affordable residential block that you completed? And tell me how comfortable you were, and was it too hot, too noisy? Could you even breathe? none of them have ever done it. I'm pretty committed to doing that in some of our residentials. I always want to do it in our show flats, for instance, and check, because if we've got it wrong, we need to know for next time. So the answer is they're not. There will be disasters over the next few years. There'll be lots of non-compliance. There'll be lots of derogations sought and corners cut. But it will level out, will stabilise, we will all improve, and the developers who can't will simply fall by the wayside because they can't actually work together with teams who should. But that isn't to say that all developers are awful. It just keeps coming back to this point, which the only way that we will meet this tightening regulatory environment is to change the environment. And we have a duty, and a lot of us do have the ability to influence that. And as Susie said earlier, you think you can't influence it, you really can. You can just go at it and start suggesting stuff way outside of your particular development, and we're finding that that's working. So the answer is no, but but as ever, it will be, and it will evolve.
And Richard, what are suppliers doing to react proactively, maybe, to the changes?
I think we work very closely with our developers. We take projects from them. We design systems, and we use everything that we've got in our portfolios to give them a solution for the challenges that they face. And we see properties in all different shapes and sizes, from single one-offs all the way through to large scale high-rise central London apartments. So and every one of them has got different challenges, but the core technologies that are used to comply with the regulations are predominantly the same. As I said before, we're moving to continuous ventilation, and we've innovated in that space over the last 20 years. We've got MEV systems in place. We've got decentral mechanical extract ventilation in place for more of a traditional approach. We've implemented generations after generations of heat recovery products into the marketplace, with more larger units that are coming, as I touched on previously, larger ventilation products for greater flows. We've concentrated on acoustics and reducing the noise out of the products, and we've been really driven hard to comply with Part L on SAP. So we've got highly efficient heat recovery units with very, very low specific fan powers. Specifically to Part O, we've developed acoustic purge ventilators. We've got attenuation in place, and also for where you can't open windows, we've got in highly polluted areas, we've developed in duct filtration systems. So we've got NOx filters, carbon filters, a whole range of accessories that can go into the system that can help, pollen filters, all the way through to low grade filters as well. So there's a range of products that we've got to suit people's requirements. And as I said, we're not the only product solution, and we're part of a system, so we have to look at every project differently. And I too like the view of changing the external environment, because we shouldn't have to put NOx and carbon filters on intakes to ventilation equipment. One of my colleagues challenges us quite regularly on the term fresh air being used for external air. He says it's not fresh, and whether I like that or not, I think he's absolutely got a point. There's a limit to what product manufacturers can do, but we are raising the quality, we are raising the performance of our products. And we're doing other things in different areas as well. Sam touched on the sustainability element. It's all linked. Overheating, Part L, and the drivers towards that is all linked to the climate crisis that we're in. And actually, we're making strides within our organisations to make sure that we use as much recycled material as possible. We've been using 100% recycled PVC in our ducting now for many years, and that's an absolute fact. And we're moving a lot of our other plastics over to recycled material that we're sourcing from the circular economy. So it's not just innovative product development in ventilation. It's how we construct our products, the materials that we use, and the services that we provide, and the education that we give to our developer colleagues in the marketplace to develop a solution that is fit for their development. And we couldn't do it without people like James and Susie as well. You know, we're experts in manufacturing products, but we're not experts in necessarily engineering complete systems and solutions, which is, you know, to Sam's point, what we all need to do collectively. We'll develop a better solution for the people who use the properties, and our primary concern is the health of people inside them and the air that they breathe. You know, we have to make sure that that environment is protected for them. So
yeah, and we've had a couple of questions in, so thank you, John and Ellie, for those. I'll come to those shortly, but just connected, Richard, with that is, how prepared do you think the supply chain is to deliver products and solutions at volume, both new and in terms of maintenance and repairs?
So I think we're already providing volume into the residential market for new build development. You know, I think there's quite a high proportion of properties that are being built already with heat recovery in them, and definitely if you look at the transition away from single point traditional intermittent fans to a continuous system, that's gaining pace now as well. So you know, we're a market leader. We manufacture you know, tens of thousands of products that go into new build residential properties, as well as retrofit properties as well. So the scale from a manufacturing point is absolutely there, and we're ready to scale up, and we've been meeting that challenge consistently over the last 20 years with the adoption of heat recovery, mechanical ventilation, extract ventilation. In terms of the skill sets that are required in the marketplace, I think there's some work to do. I think that there's some good installers out there. There's people who do it properly. There's people who also aren't as educated as they should be, and they do cut corners. And as an industry, what we've tried to do is educate as many installers as possible as an industry to make sure that you know, ducting in mechanical systems are installed correctly to improve their efficiency, reduce the noise levels that they generate, and actually function as they should do. So I think the answer to that question is it could be better. I think we need more skilled people out there applying products in the right way. But we're as a product manufacturer, we're ready. We do complete installation work through some of our brands in the UK, and we are equipping all of our installers with the right tools and the knowledge to be able to go in and retrofit solutions, maintain them, repair them, because that's ultimately really important as well. And I think Part O deals with new properties, but also we're looking at, when we deep retrofit existing stock, we're also looking at technology that we can retrofit into the properties that will help as well, such as decentralized heat recovery ventilation. You know, if the properties are cool inside, then we can recover the cool as well as keeping the heat out. And I think that we've all got to keep a bit of an open mind about what the solutions are going to be moving forward into retrofit and new build properties. But I think it's fair to say, I speak on behalf of my organisation. We've got brands such as Ventaxia, Manrose in our group. But I also speak, I hope, on behalf of the entire ventilation market. We have great products in the marketplace, not just from us, but from our competition as well. And we're all there waiting to deliver those products in the systems that are required to meet the regulations, to help people like Sam, working with Susie and James as well.
Yeah, and from the reality, the installation side to the modelling side, Susie, is the modelling industry ready, and do they understand how to comply with the reg?
Well, that's a big question. I think we're equipped. You know, we've got these dynamic thermal modelling tools, TAS, IS, Design Builder, and they've all released updates recently that meet all the additional little tweaks that is within the approved document if you're following the modelling route. So we've got the tools and we've got the methodology in place. whether we've got enough modelers is an unknown question yet. We don't. It remains to be seen how many projects will go through the simplified method within ADO and how many will go through the TM59 route. And I think we've all kind of realised over the last 6 months that with the noise implications and with the challenges of actually meeting the simplified method in high risk locations like London, and actually weirdly in some of the low risk locations that the requirements are even more onerous. It's quite strange, the targets that are set through the simplified method. So I think we're going to see rather more dynamic thermal modelling assessments than we had anticipated a year ago when we knew this regulation was coming. And it's hard to know how many modellers there are out there. I mean, I'm a big part of the industry, but yeah, and I've been meaning to reach out to sort of IBSE in the building simulation group at CIBSE to sort of find out whether there's discussion going. I haven't heard anything coming out of them about Part O and giving advice. I know that CIBSE had a meeting this morning. CIBSE are putting together some training courses, so I think we'll see some training coming out around Part O and possibly around TM59, sort of specifically for Part O compliance. And I think we're going to need that because we're going to need a lot more modellers, and there's a real risk of seeing some quite poor modelling coming out as we, you know, put graduates on the tools and sort of throw the manual at them and hope they come out with some good results. And it's a bit more complicated than that, and I'm a bit anxious that we're going to see some damage to the modelling reputation as more models get pushed through for expedience, and that could be a problem. So
yeah, getting 270 degrees rather than 27, or 10 air changes rather than 100, or whatever it is.
Those sort of things, but also just, yeah, inadvertent as well as yeah, they're quite complex tools and it's quite easy to make mistakes. So.
And James, from an environmental consultancy perspective and the industry, do they understand how to comply with the regulation?
Well, I've been on a sort of an educating mission for several years now, and I think in our industry, people are slowly catching up. There's a lot of confusion out there. I mean, the regulation itself confuses people, mixes up between free area and equivalent area, and there's all sorts of things which throw people off. And actually, we published a guidance document just yesterday, actually. The Institute of Acoustics and the Association of Noise Consultants, and myself, along with some colleagues on the committee, wrote the document and published it, and it's actually a number of pages describing what is effectively 3 paragraphs in the regulation to how to comply with the regulation, and even then, that's asking for things that people are just not used to dealing with. So it will take. I'm on a journey, let's say, to help people along the way, to help people understand, and people like Susie and myself, we need to be working so much closer in our industry, that because they're all intrinsically linked, and understanding, for example, what dynamic thermal modelers need to model their buildings, and dynamic thermal modelers understanding what acoustic consultants need, for example, for designing mitigation, noise mitigation. That all is really important, and it's an educating mission, really. So I think the answer is not yet, no, but we are on the journey and we are making inroads. Yeah.
It's a really good point, actually, because I think that's one of the other skills that modelers are going to need, is that ability to give advice on what the results are showing and what the mitigations might be and how best to work with other, you know, consultants in order to find that optimum solution, but also be conscious that there are these other criteria on sill heights and reach of openable windows, and that all of that has to be included and factored into the calculation. So it's more than just knowing the modelling software that you're using. It's the context around it and the regulation as well.
And the push-pull, but yeah, everything together, and it's a holistic strategy that everything should go into the one strategy. I think is my view. Yeah.
And it often takes going around the loop a few times in order to really narrow down the right solution.
Yeah.
Shamma's asked a question, Susie. In terms of thermal modelling, what's the basic difference between TM59 and Part O?
Okay, they're very similar. It's irritatingly similar because it just frustrates me that ADO needed to change, and they haven't given any rationale for why they've made changes to TM59, and it's going to confuse a lot of people that there are now these two methodologies which are, you know, essentially the same but are key differences. So the key ones are around, there's some more specifics around how windows open, and Part O requires you to open them slowly from an internal temperature of 22 up to 26 is when they reach their maximum opening. And then in addition, there's a criteria around night bedroom windows, and that they should be open all night if it's 23 degrees at 11 p.m. So there's sort of subtle differences to how TM59 works. It's pure TM59 as we're learning to call it, but or original TM59. The other key one is that ADO doesn't allow you to use blinds, internal blinds within the modelling assessment, and that's quite a huge one because historically that's always been a bit of a last kind of push to get you over the line is to add in internal blinds or curtains. And I'm torn on this one because I think on the one hand, yes, that's something that could easily get taken out and replaced by occupants for something that is more to their taste, but I think most of us do have blinds or curtains in our homes, particularly bedrooms. And particularly in recent weather, we were all advised to close our blinds and curtains when it was sunny on the sunny sides of the building. So to exclude them from the model, I think is tough. It is tough, and it is going to make compliance hard in the tougher parts of the country, particularly London and the South East, particularly in flats, particularly single aspect, all the sort of higher risk areas. I think the one thing to mention, and which may become the new silver bullet, but I've not had enough opportunity to try it out yet, is the modelling tools are now enabling the facility to include ceiling fans. And I think this could be quite a useful thing because obviously that just the breeze generated by a ceiling fan, particularly if you're in a single aspect or a area where it's hard to get the breeze through the windows for acoustic reasons as well, could be a really influential, you know, the perceived temperature comes down by a degree or two, and then the fact that the models can now include that possibility, we may see that more commonly designed in. It's obviously relatively low cost compared to a full comfort cooling system, but can deliver quite a lot of comfort for quite a small amount of energy running costs. So I would like to see, I'd like to say that we're going to see more ceiling fans going into homes in future.
Excellent. A multifaceted question from Jack, probably for Sam and or Richard. Do you see much opportunity to use MEV, mechanical extract ventilation, to mitigate overheating at night in bedrooms? And would it be the same system to meet Part F requirements, either at a different duty or a larger system that can meet both requirements? Richard, maybe?
Oh, it's a tough one, right? I think to give a politician's answer, I think it would depend. It would depend on a number of factors. You know, and MEV is a fantastic system. We do larger capacity units as well. The housings are typically the same size, but we do have larger fans and impellers in the products to move a larger volume of air, and if you couple that with larger duct sizes, then actually you can get quite a flow through the system. I think MEV on its own is going to be quite difficult to deliver in some properties. I'm being quite careful what I say here. MEV is not a bad system at all, but I think also you have to take it in context of the system. And if you can keep the heat out in the first place, then you've got more chance of delivering and getting rid of the heat through the MEV systems. I think typically the systems that we see though being utilised in properties which have a high overheating risk, typically high-rise flats in city centres, is mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, and they're probably by far the better systems to put in. Because you can so that you're supplying and extracting air in a controlled way, and you can ramp both of those up whilst not relying on small window vents to bring the makeup air in. So I think my answer is that it really does depend.
And Sam, what about trickle vents? Do you think we're more likely to need more inlet vents for make-up air or exhaust?
Probably a little bit outside my expertise, to be honest, but in terms of, yes, we are, but then those have to have acoustic attenuation in most of the environments, and the air's got to be appropriate. So I think the broader remit is just always coming back to, if we've done everything passively, how can we change what we're dealing with externally and keep pushing that? I know I sound like a broken record, but it does come back to that. But sort of taking a sort of sideways glance at the question the other way, what we're finding positive change that's been driven is there's sort of an assumption that we have to have mechanical cooling in a lot of city centre apartments. We simply can't get away from it with the current external conditions, and what that's driving, or particularly actually outside of the residential sector, is a requirement for green leases in a really positive way. So we're able to get tenants, whether it's a PRS provider or a fund, to sign up to green leases, which in essence then allows you to get long-term commitments to renewable supplies of energy, which takes the edge off the need for all the mechanical cooling. So the industry is starting to veer off into different approaches so that they can hit their net zero carbon targets and not simply pay lip service to it or just drive offsetting. They pass that on to the tenancies. So we're drawing up various different green leases for office, residential, life science products that we're working on. Because a lot of the time we're just falling back and going, we are going to have to use energy to create acceptable internal environments. But if that energy can come from sources as the grid decarbonises that are acceptable, then that's where we go. So it's a bit of a sideways answer, but it's sort of a different change that the regulatory environment is driving in terms of commercial approach to buildings.
I think could I just make a point on that as well, because I think that there's a factor that we haven't spoken about, which is running costs of systems as well with mechanical cooling systems. They aren't free to run, and they do cost the people inside the properties to run them. So I think that and I think even Part O says that it's only as a last resort that you should use mechanical cooling or active cooling, and I think that's a really important part of what we do. There's a lot of people out there who struggle, who are fuel poor perhaps in the winter. They're also going to struggle to run air conditioning units and plants and other cooling devices in the summer as well. So to Sam's earlier point of removing as much mechanical stuff as possible, it's got to be good for people on low incomes who struggle, so that we don't have to rely on mechanical cooling to develop buildings that can be lived in the areas like city centres where we want to live.
Yeah, I'm just it's a fascinating element. I'm just conscious of time, and apologies to everybody for not having the open forum, but just with us getting on for the hour, we do have quite a few other questions which I'll circulate to the team, and we'll try to respond to in isolation of this evening's event. But with the discussions about cooling just mentioned there, and the hot topic, as if you'll pardon the pun, with the weather recently, a general final question for all. And thank you, John, for asking this. With the UK temperature provisionally hitting 40.2 degrees, are we past the point of natural ventilation for apartments? And should we just move to air conditioning in city centre locations, as this is where the buyers will want it?
I'd refer to my previous answer. I think it's not just the wealthy people who live in city centre developments, and they're the ones who can afford to run air conditioning units all the time. So I think other solutions have got to be found to deliver workable solutions in habitable dwellings in all locations.
Yeah, I mean, Susie's probably better to answer this for the point I'm about to make. But because it's 40 outside doesn't necessarily mean that changing the way we design the buildings and can limit the internal heat gains, the heat gains from solar or otherwise, and that's the effect that we're trying to solve. I think so. It's
No, absolutely. And I live in quite an old house, but it still, when it was 40 degrees outside, I live in London 2 days ago, it was still peaking only at the thermostat in our hall read 29, which is still hot, and it was very uncomfortable, but it wasn't 40 degrees, and it was noticeably cooler inside. And we've Victorian house, thick solid walls, high ceilings, we kept all the doors and windows closed, we did all the things that all the news was telling us. So yeah, fundamentally, if we put mechanical cooling in all of our homes, we're only exacerbating the problem. We're using more fossil fuels to generate those and run those until everything's renewable. But we're also shoving all that heat back to the outside environment, which is exacerbating the microclimate around. So if you've got big block flats, all of them are spitting their heat out. They're just making it hotter for all their neighbours. So it's not an ideal outcome. And actually, for most of the year, I know the last 2 days were exceptional. For most of the year, it is possible to keep UK homes very comfortable and often quite a lot cooler inside than outside without using comfort cooling. So I think we need to reserve it for the places that really need it and not just fall back on it. We can do a good job designing. You know, if we do a good job, we shouldn't need it as designers. So yeah,
Anything to add on that? Anything to add there, Sam?
Yeah, adaptation is the answer, and then hopefully change. And just building on those points, I mean, as I keep alluding to, plant trees, change the immediate local climate. We see it. We take on plenty of brownfield sites and push the urban greening that as far as we possibly can to create some local cooling, get rid of the traffic, get rid of those elements. And then also, to Susie's point, just design well. You know, paint the buildings white, simple things like that reflect the heat, keep the heat gain down. It's, you know, it sounds crazy, but those elements, speaking from personal experience and having designed buildings that way, make a big difference. So the answer is perhaps in the short term, yes, we are going to have cooling, and it's going to cost money, as Richard says, and it's unsustainable. The answer in the long term is change what's outside, even if locally, and adapt. You know, we can't stop the global temperature. I think we're past that point. It's local adaptation to make places habitable again. Otherwise, no one will live in cities ever again.
And there are plenty of cities that do see routinely 40 degrees and don't have routine air conditioning, and they use shutters and awnings and all sorts of external shading devices that aren't commonplace in the UK but need to become more commonplace.
Yeah, brise soleil, solar reflective glazing, U values, G values. Yeah, they're all tools at our disposal as engineers, as construction professionals.
You go anywhere in the Mediterranean, they've all got external shutters. Every single flat has external shutters on it. Or an awning.
Siestas as well.
No, I vote for that.
So on that note, I'll draw this evening to a close. I'm sure everybody that's been listening in and contributed to this evening's event will be keen for me to pass on my thanks to James, to Susie, to Richard and to Sam. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for this evening. As mentioned earlier, we will be looking to do a couple more events in November, December time towards the end of the year, and in June. So there's certainly plenty of questions and subjects that and avenues that we need to find out a little bit more on, and that people are keen to find out more about. So yeah, I look forward to seeing you all at future events. But in the short term, thank you all very much for coming.